What's up, everyone? So, what in the F is going on with his posture? I just got this brought to my attention because I don't watch the news, especially the fake news. We don't watch that. So, just real quick, this is just a really good example by looking at his posture of what you don't want to do with your low back, and this is what commonly people come to us for. So, you guys can see that his back is super curved. Can you guys see that? How it's really, really curved right there. And his gut is coming forward as well. So basically, what was rumored on medium.com, I just very quickly looked this up. You guys might know more details than I do, but it was rumored that he wears heel lifts, or he wears special shoes that are 2.5 to 3.5 inches taller, because I guess he's self-conscious about his height or something. This is the rumor. Again, no disrespect here. I'm not going to get political in this video at all. I'm simply going to objectively look at this posture and make my own conclusions on what it could be. And it could be something completely different, but I will tell you biomechanically what's happening and how this is going to affect your low back specifically over time. When he's clearly in, you can't see because he wears this suit. It's harder to kind of make out to the layperson's eye. This might be difficult to pick up on, but it looks very obvious to me. He's got an anterior pelvic tilt. So anterior pelvic tilt is when the pelvis starts to rotate this way. Okay, so it's like a bucket, and you tilt the bucket forward, and thus you basically start to tighten up your low back. All this stuff, all the fascia that connects here, and all the muscles in the spine, the erector spinae, the QL, all these muscles in here tighten up. And so a common thing that people will have that we see a lot, and this is where commonly we see with like low back surgeries, if you get to that point, hopefully you're not there yet, but L5S1 is right through here. That's the very last disc before you get to the sacrum, which is right here. So essentially, anterior pelvic tilt, there's a lot more people walking around with that in general, but when you have any type of heel lift, so like for women that wear high heels, essentially that's dumping their hip forward even more. So that's where women will commonly complain of back pain. Women that wear heels all day, your feet are sliding forward, your toes are jamming up, and you're dumping your pelvis forward. And there can be one more than the other, but in general, you're just dumping the pelvis further forward. And to compensate against gravity, you literally have to bring your head back over. So ultimately, your eyes need to stay on the horizon, so your body's going to adapt. And this is a common thing that we see with people where this might not be calibrated right, and they're literally having to keep their eye on the horizon, but maybe your head's kind of coming forward. And this, again, all contributes to back tightness in the low back. So if this isn't right, if you have problems up here, you can have low back problems here. The other thing, too, that we heard about was like dementias and neurodegeneration and stuff like that. I mean, President Trump is at that age where, and that's going to keep going off, but he's at the age where like we're seeing a skyrocket of like dementias, Alzheimer, Parkinson's, and a classic symptom or a classic sign that you can see with someone that has Parkinsonian or Parkinson's like symptoms or signs that it's obvious, like they have like kind of this, they're kind of hunched forward, right? So that's a little bit more obvious that there's maybe some brain things going on. We start to kind of hunch forward and we start to have the shuffling gait. So you'll see elderly people with kind of a shuffling gait. And actually the test for that too, which, he could have certain aspects of that, not necessarily saying he has the actual genetic condition of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, but there's some things there like when you get in your 70s, unless you're really, really good about movement and taking care of yourself, I mean, some people just have that, and so you have to be able to know how to manage and deal with that. But essentially, one of the tests is if I have someone stand here and to test to see if they have an inability to stabilize themselves, I might go like that, and they can't hold themselves. They'll literally fall backwards, and there's a certain amount of steps that we look for. There's basically, how stable are you? Like, can you hold yourself up? Basically, you get into this flex posture. Think of like in infancy. You start out in this flexed position, and then you start to get more and more extension as your frontal lobe and everything starts to develop. You start to become more of that adult Homo sapien. Your brain's developed, your spine extensors are developing. So what happens, of course, when you're young, you start to develop the extensor tone. As you age, you can have neurodegenerative conditions that basically your posture will show. Like, this is what's happening with the brain. It's showing in the posture. But I think some of this stuff, even with him, with Trump, is self-induced with his shoes. So again, it could be a combination of things. At the end of the day, there's certain things that you need to be aware of that will help kind of reverse this. So if you're someone that already has this anterior pelvic tilt, you feel tightness and pain in your back, you likely have more of this tilt forward and it's tightening your back. So what we need to do is, there's a lot of different things we can do, but there's some key areas that we know we need to do. Is number one, if you guys want to try this right now, put your hands on your pelvis and just kind of tilt your pelvis forward, and then try to tighten your butt cheeks, right? I always tell people, if I were to put a dollar bill between your butt cheeks, don't let me take it. That's how I want this to be tight. So if you can't even activate your glutes, you very well could, and you can just look at yourself in a mirror to see if you really have more of an anterior tilt, but it's harder to activate your glutes. And the big part of getting someone out of back pain and getting that tightness is getting those glutes to activate, neurologically connect the brain to the body, the brain to the glute, and the glutes to the brain. You have to be able to get into a good pelvic position. And the move, you guys talk about this a lot, Dr. Mike and Andrew over there, they're all about this pelvic tilt because it's very important. Like low back pain, that's the first place you really want to start, okay? If you're still having trouble and you're doing all these pelvic tilts, that's when I'm like, okay, the next step is, do you have any problems with the brain to body connection, right? We know we can help the brain and the body by doing body exercises, but there's also very specific exercises that help the brain, which in turn helps fire down to the muscles in order to get all of this stuff to work better. Because I see a lot of people that will continue to struggle even though they've been to PTs or chiros or they've done all these movement types of training and they're still having chronic tightness or problems. That leads me to believe we definitely want to go down the rabbit trail of, do you have any types of post-concussion, whiplash, things that would distort the information from your inner ear vestibular system to how the eyes are sitting on the horizon. Your brain has to calculate all these freaking things really fast in order to keep you upright and keep your posture on point. So, but again, the number one thing you can do from the standpoint if you have back pain is start to move better. That's going to take care of and get you to a certain point for most people, right? We're talking like 80 to 90% of people that just aren't aware of how they're moving, and they need to learn how to move better, and they need to learn maybe some specific exercises that will expedite the process of getting there faster. I hope that helps. Let me know if you guys have any questions along the way. I don't know how to set this iPad up so this thing doesn't keep disappearing, but we're talking about Donald Trump and his posture and what's happening with it. So again, pelvic tilt. He's got the pelvic tilt forward. His legs are basically straight. His heels are up, most likely from that shoe lift. It's hard to see, and that's the part of it that why people aren't completely aware of why his posture looks like this. So his heels are up, dumps the pelvis forward, therefore tightening the low back like this, right? You want actually, and if we're looking at Donald's picture here, you want a slight low back curve, but he's creating abnormally large curve, which is going to create more tightness in the low back and therefore dysfunction, mobility problems, pain. So that's why we don't want to stay in that position. We want to get out of that position. So turning your pelvis back. So if you guys have already, if you're on the ground, if you're standing up, I always like to have people start on the ground where they're laying on their back, and then we have them play with their pelvis back and forth, anterior to posterior. Sometimes that causes pain, but for most, on your back is going to be probably one of the best positions to start, if not on your stomach, in order to find where am I having problems isolating the movement of my pelvis. Remember, when you move the pelvis and isolate it, you move in this whole bucket forward and back, and you're trying to find, a lot of times, if there's a pain pattern forward, guess what? You're probably going to do better with exercises that facilitate more of this posterior tilt, and that opens up the disc space, allows nutrition and healing to kind of get in there, blood flow, which there already isn't a lot of blood flow in that area, and disc and all that stuff in general. So we want to create movement, and we want to be able to get the brain and the body to connect to different parts, basically isolation, right? Now, of course, we can go a step further, and we always want to find, is there an asymmetry? So obviously, looking at Trump's picture there, we don't know if he has one more than the other from that side angle, but most likely there's probably a difference between one tilt versus the other, because again, the pelvis kind of moves kind of like this, and you get a little bit of sacral movement here. Remember, the sacrum's this bone right here. It's the foundation of the house. All the spine vertebrae sit on top of that. Okay, and then you've got these iliums, these little wings right here. So, what do I think it is ultimately? I haven't read anything else, but just from that, I would want to look at, number one, how well can he isolate and move that pelvis right now? Because I can guarantee right now he's setting himself up for degenerative disc problems, specifically in that L5, L4, L5, S1 area, basically the lowest part of the back, because again, that just dumps forward, and that, that's where you see a lot of the degenerative problems as people age, if they are not good at being able to control their pelvis and just being aware of certain positions they're in. Sitting, of course, can cause problems, right? But so can standing. When he's standing like that, he's actually probably creating a lot more problems standing than he is if he's sitting. Now, the other thing, though, is, hey, maybe he put these things in because his back feels better. Maybe he has a flexion, low back flexion intolerant issue, and he likes to have his back in extension because it feels better. I don't know. I don't know Trump's medical history. I don't know his, I don't know what's going on with him. I'm just talking about posture and how it looks. For those of you that just joined, we're just talking about the posture here. And of course, naturally too, when you see other shots of him in photos, this is coming forward, his arms are coming forward like this. I mean, think about the weight that's happening here. Not just in the low back, but think about what's happening with every time you translate your head forward, which this is like literally everyone has a forward head translation, which basically means, roughly an inch forward is doubling your head weight. You literally got a bowling ball, and it's just literally falling this way. So of course, that's straining your spine all the way down to your low back. You're gonna have problems all the way. I guarantee you, man, if I were to feel his spine is so tight, and it's got to be so tight and probably painful. You guys have any questions, let me know. So anyway, man, it's really messed up. Hope you guys learned something here today. Let me know if you have any questions about all this stuff. But again, what can you do if you have back pain? Find out, number one, is it more flexion? Is it more flexion intolerant? Which basically means if you try to touch your toes, does that hurt? Or is it when you go back? That's the first part of a low back pain assessment. Forward or back? Which one hurts? If it hurts going forward, touching your toes, number one, stop doing that. And then number two, you want to start working extension, because it's probably the beginning of a disc issue. It could just be, a sprain strain, but we already know that those, if you have this for years, you're going to start getting problems there. So you want to kind of come back like this, all right? The other thing is you want to find out if it's extension problems, if it's like if the spine's getting all jammed up, like in this case, if it's jamming up from too much extension, or I'm sorry, if you feel pain in extension like this, then you'd probably do better with some flexion activities, right? And typically what we see, if you touch your toes, this is like most people don't have good rounding of this low back because it's so tight in here from like sitting. We're just a sitting society, man. So if things are tightening up around the back, so mobilizing this area, getting some adjustments in that area, getting some soft tissue work in that area, stretching and mobilizing this area, learning how to control the pelvis, fire the glutes in order to stabilize the low back. Most people lose mobility in the hips, all right? And they think about this as a ball and socket joint. If you start losing mobility there, where's it going to come from? It's going to come from above and below that joint. So then people start talking about knee pain, right? Because they lose mobility in the hip, which is that ball and socket joint. If you lose mobility there, if it's a ball and socket joint, just like your shoulder, it's like made to be mobile, but you have to have a certain amount of mobility and stability above and below in order to keep that joint healthy. So this is more prone to injury, this ball and socket joint. So you want to make sure this glute's firing really well to stabilize the area, but you also want to work on, the actual ability to control it in full ranges of motion, okay? Most people don't do that, do they? We sit and we just tighten things up. So most people have restrictions in that area. So the other thing actually noteworthy of this is when your pelvis is tilted forward, like you see here with Donald Trump, he most likely has very tight hip flexors. So hip flexors are essentially the muscles that attach to the big old femur bone, your leg bone, and they attach up right through here, actually the front of your lumbar vertebra. So there's actually attachments. It starts here. So if you're sitting all the time, let's say we have to drive, I do long distance driving, and I have, I just feel like I've got this hip impingement, this tightness in the hip. A lot of it is working the tightness out of here, but when you have tight on this front side, you're probably going to have weaker glutes in general. So we want to start using and isolating the glutes, getting those to fire up, finding the right pelvic position, which starts to deactivate the front side hip flexors. And hip flexors do what? They just lift the leg, right? They lift the leg, and then rectus femoris helps kick the leg. So you want to loosen this stuff up. That's why a lot of times we will get in here, we'll actually go really kind of deep into here and do like active release type therapies where we're basically doing like a pin and stretch of the muscle, and we're making sure we kind of elongate that muscle as much as possible while simultaneously firing the glutes to turn off the hip flexor muscles. Remember, the glutes are basically, look at any muscle, man, there's always the opposing muscle group. You've got the tricep and the bicep. Very simply, if the bicep is turned on, if you're really using the bicep, you're going to have a little bit less activation, right, in the tricep, because how are you supposed to do a curl? I mean, there's going to be a little bit, but there's not enough. You're basically turning off, in a lot of ways, the tricep in order to do that movement, okay? There's always some variances here, but just bear with me. Just in general, you want to tighten up the muscles and activate the muscles that are on the opposite side of the tight muscles. So hip flexors are usually short, tight, and weak. So you actually want to strengthen those too. So again, there's a lot of nuances here, I know, but I'm giving you just in a general starting point. If you guys are trying to do something tonight, you're going to be like, hey, I got some really tight hip flexors, or it hurts when I go back in extension. Maybe those hip flexors are also pulling, right? A lot of times we'll see when I assess someone's extension, we look at what's going on with the pelvis. Are they bending from that low back, right? Is that where your extension's coming from? Or is it coming from your hips? So when I come back, I always like to teach people, when you come back, think like Matrix. Who's seen The Matrix? I know I'm dating myself. Great movie, right? When they're dodging the bullets. So I always say, let's practice a little Matrix. If it doesn't cause pain, you basically bring that pelvis back, tighten the glutes, rock hard, right? Tighten them up, and then lean back. And so now you kind of get into a Matrix move, right? But you got to keep those glutes locked. Otherwise, you're hinging from the low back. which is just going to cause more problems and irritation, which is typically why people report, oh, I got pain in my low. It's like right here. It's always right here. It's always right here. It's like really nowhere else. Maybe feel some tightness in the front, but it's always pain right there because that's where you're hinging from. If you're hinging from that joint all the time, every time you do something extension, like, yeah, it's going to start wearing and tearing. It's going to start hurting. So what can you do to kind of get out of that? Well, number one, bring the pelvis back this way. Get a little core activation. So I usually do this. I'm like, hey, let's see if you can kind of reflexively activate the core, tighten the glutes, and lean back. Does that help? Does it feel less pain when you do that? If it does, okay, great. Then you already know that you're hinging from your low back. Your glutes, your pelvis isn't in the right position to begin with. You probably have that anterior pelvic tilt. Not necessarily 100%, but more than likely you've got some tightness in those hip flexors, which basically means you're pulling on your low back because that's where they attach. You know, it's like you lift up your leg, you're literally going, right? It's like pulling to lift because your core is not activating. So again, spinal stability, then you got the hip mobility. Yeah. If I'm going into a squat, what am I using? I'm using hips, and then my spine's not moving, it's staying stable, okay? The hardest part people have with a lot of this stuff is just learning to disassociate their childhood traumas. No, not that, but that is sometimes, I'm not sure. Not with low back necessarily, but disassociate the spinal control from the hip control. And so a lot of it's just, you got to put in the time to do this, guys. Like, you can't, there's no way around it. The most frustrating thing for me is, like, you know, people come in and expect you to fix them. And yeah, I can help you get out of pain most likely much faster than you're going to be able to do it. Why? Because that's what I do. I'm not like just focused on getting you out of pain though, right? I'm focused on, here's what you learn. Here's the tools, tactics, and strategies you need to be able to go beyond pain. If you're, again, you can't, pain is a very poor goal. You can't, if you're people that come in and just like I'll ask them, are you just interested in getting out of pain, or do you want to learn the shit that you need to do to actually get beyond pain? Like, pain's here. You have to go beyond that. Pain into performance, and then into, wellness. And even from a chiropractic standpoint, chiropractic wellness care should be, you come in however often, usually every couple weeks. It's not just the adjustment. Some people like that. It's like kind of getting that quick massage, that quick reset of stress and that release. And that's fine and dandy because that's awesome for health. But then there's also that population of people, and you got to figure out who you are, is do you want to add on to what you already know and keep learning? I myself want to keep learning in anything I do. Like, I want to know, what's the next step? What's the next level? I want to create that buffer zone between me and whatever pain and dysfunction brought me in. And so, good. Let's keep learning. Let's start with the ABCs of your movement, which is what? Learning how to fire your glutes. Can you fire one butt cheek and then the other without recruiting your hamstrings or your back or your QL muscles? Can you then take that to the next level after you've done thousands of repetitions of that? Can you then take that now, because now you have this new motor program, just like you learned how to drive a car. Now you know that's already there. Now it's programmed because you did so many reps. Then you get into making words. Words could be is something as simple as doing like a bridge, starting to combine things and utilize different movements and combining maybe a couple different muscles together, or just doing certain movements in a different position, like standing up. And then getting into functional integration is like more of that phase 3 aspect, where you're basically trying to learn a new skill set. It could be yoga, it could be ballet, it could be dance, it could be anything. Movement is so vast and varied, and the more you do that, the more you're going to basically get further away from pain, because you're now creating a more complex motor program. As long as it's done correctly. The biggest mistake people make is they don't learn the ABCs. They don't learn how to use their body parts individually, right? And this, again, like MoveU teaches this whole concept as well. You guys It's learning individual body parts and movements, the different pieces that make up the alphabet, right?